Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast on my new book. It's not just about grades, it's about culture. But just keep in mind, this podcast is not just about this book. It is a podcast that looks at uh, education, what's going on in education, what can we do as teachers and parents to make a difference in how African American, African Caribbean, and African children globally, how they are educated. So this is a podcast about the education of Black children, regardless if they live in the United States or in the United Kingdom or in Jamaica or in Ghana, wherever they may be. There needs to be a revolution about how Black children are taught. As far as I can tell from my experience as an educator in the Western school system primarily, in the United States and in the United Kingdom, I have observed that the quality of education that Black children receive often excludes them at the same time. It's an exclusionary education where they are learning about Western values and culture, but completely ignoring their own identity and their own history and their own culture. And that does not make any sense to me. And what we're looking at here, we're looking at the attainment gap, okay? And we're looking at the deficit model of education and how that's impacting on Black children in the United States and all over the world, in fact, because on the African continent, they still use the colonial model of education to teach their children, which is just bizarre as far as I'm concerned. In the West, we see a colorblind model or approach being used, but let's not be, dissuaded by that, to think that there's some form of equality going on with this colorblind model of education, because that there isn't. If there was, then we would have seen that in the last 60 years, since the end of segregation and the Jim Crow era in America and integration and the civil rights movement, we would have seen mass improvement in the attainment of Black children. But in fact, Black children, African American, and other Black people who live in the United States, who migrate and emigrate to the United States, are still achieving at the bottom of the ladder. We have exceptions with certain groups like Nigerians who are doing well, and we see Jamaicans are not doing too badly. But if you're a Black child growing up in poverty, in the lower rungs of society, you are going to be, on that trajectory from the school to prison pipeline. And the same thing goes for the United Kingdom. Also, on the island of Jamaica, we must be aware that education is still very elitist in that country. And also, in African countries, in African nations, we see that the elite send their children to the West to be educated. So, which doesn't make sense. You're like sending your children to the colonizer to be educated, and where they are reading texts from various not, colonial texts, basically. I mean, these are beautiful books. I'm an English teacher, but at the same time, we must keep in mind that if you're teaching Black children about Western authors and focusing on Western cultures and traditions and religions and way of life and values, and they're integrated within a Western cosmology, then it doesn't give them enough time to cultivate their own African identity and they won't have time to explore their own culture to the level where they can see the contributions that their ancestors made to the world. And this is what my podcast is about. So if you're watching this video, please share and like and get the message out there, because this is something that we all have to pay attention to. So I'm going to be reading from my book today. If I can get that camera to focus it on it properly. It's called It's Not Just About Grades, It's About Culture. All right. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it at Barnes and Noble, or you can get it from my website, culturetransforms.com. Please go and register on my website to get access to my curriculum ideas on how you can help Black children perform better by inculcating cultural values that will enhance them, will create a sense of pride and create a sense of belonging and so on, and also create a safe space for those children to learn in, not a hostile environment where their history is minimized. And as we can see in the United States, Black history is being removed from the curriculum in many states in the US, or they are tweaking the history to make white settlers who have committed genocide, human trafficking, enslavement, and so on, try to make them look benign rather than reveal the truth about what they have done so that we can all heal. But also we have to keep in mind that one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because as a teacher, I looked at the Asian community. A lot of my students in the UK were Asians, and I always admired them because they worked so hard. They had work ethics, but they had high expectations coming from parents and families, and their families were heavily involved in their education, unlike the Black community in the United Kingdom. I mean, we had Saturday schools, supplementary schools in England during the Windrush, after the Windrush, when we had in the 60s and 70s, when Bernard Cord wrote the book, How the West Indian Child Became Educationally Subnormal. And that was one of the impetus for me writing this book, along with my own experience. So this book is an ethnographic study, and it is something that we can't ignore. So I am going to be reading from chapter 11, Cultural Awareness and Successful Parenting. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just going to give you a taste. I want you to buy a copy of the book. All right, so here we go. Numerous studies have proven over the decades that parenting practices contribute significantly to adolescents' sense of pride in themselves and fosters a positive evaluation of their ethnic heritage. If parents are authoritative and not permissive or neglectful in the manner that they impart their cultural heritage to their children, then the outcome is often more beneficial. Now, that's something to think about. I'm going to pause and talk about various things. Now, a permissive parent, okay, I took psychology in university, and after university, get my teaching qualifications. And one of the things that we talk about in psychology is different types of parenting: authoritative, permissive, egalitarian, and so on. And of course, we have peer parenting, where parents come down to the level of the children in order to befriend them rather than discipline them and give them structure. So let's continue. Then the outcome is during my career as a teacher in the American and British school system, the role of parents cannot be understated when it comes to the performance and achievement of pupils, regardless of their ethnicity and social class. Parents who attend school functions and attend consultations regularly are often more likely to influence their children's results than those parents who leave it all up to the school to ensure that their children do well. Now, we know that a lot of parents, if they had the choice, would not do this. But then we have some parents who utterly believe in the school system and see it as a transformational tool for their children in order for them to become successful. However, that is partially true, but there's also a huge caveat in that statement that many parents ignore. And the fact that schools can only do so much, that the majority of the teaching of the children in terms of values, confidence, self-awareness, and so on, does not really occur in the schools. It occurs at home. And when you rely on a school to impart these values to your children, then you are making a significant mistake. You need to do this. You have children, that comes with responsibility, and you have to devote yourself to educating your children about their history and culture, and most importantly, their sense of self and identity. As a former owner of a tuition company, I can thoroughly attest to the fact that parents who devote time and money to ensure their children's success academically, culturally, and spiritually are often not disappointed with the investment they make, because 90% of the time, these young people achieve good to excellent results on standardized testing. Now, this is a very key and important aspect that we must look at. I gathered most of my data and began writing this book as a result of my study as a teacher, looking at data. Data is a very important part of my work, where I look at how children perform, right? So I do a lot of performance management when it comes to students, looking at their grades, looking at how they did on a summative assessment. Okay. First, I give them the formative assessments before I lead up to the summative assessment, right? But I'm checking them each during the term 2 to 3 times, right? To see if they are developing a sound understanding of the curriculum. Okay. So testing is very important. Now, when children take standardized tests, which is very prevalent in the world, everywhere in the world, standardized testing is absolutely critical to a child's trajectory towards university. Okay, if they're planning to go to university, and even if they're not going to university, if they're going to do an apprenticeship, which is very popular in European countries and in some African countries. Okay, they need to have the grades to prove to the employer who's going to do the apprenticeship with them, or to that university or college who's going to take them on board. And what they are looking at is whether this child has the ability to focus and study and to practice delayed gratification. Okay, so there's so many elements that's going on in here. So we cannot take those standardized tests for granted. And when we look at the results of these standardized testing, we see that Black children are at the bottom of the attainment gap. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, my book talks about all of this. If you haven't got yourself a copy, go out there and buy one now. Okay, I'm not talking just off the top of my head or writing just to be seen. I'm writing about this to raise awareness. Okay, and the powers that be would want you to ignore this book. Okay, and I tell you, a lot of parents I spoke to, individuals I spoke to in the Black community, you know what their answer is when I told them I've written this book? First of all, they show no interest, many of them. They're really, it's astounding to me. They show no interest. And they also say, I don't read. You don't read, but you expect your child to be successful. You expect your child to be discerning, to be able to navigate the world without reading. And having the skills to read and decode and use inference and analyze and think critically. This is astounding, right? So we got to look at the fact that the Black community itself and the parenting that's going on within the Black community globally, right? You could see that the parents are not up to the task, right? Because they themselves don't read, right? They themselves don't see the importance of books. Okay. So when you have parents who don't value books, who don't value reading, right? Then how can you expect their children to do well? Okay. So this is something that we have to keep in our mind, at the forefronts of our minds. All nationality and social classes attend my tuition center. The parents all had the same objective, which was to improve their child's chances of success on the 11 plus grammar school entrance examination, which is in the UK, prepare primary school age youngsters for SATs, and most importantly, providing their teenage son or daughter with additional practice and preparation for the GCSE exam, which is the biggest exam in the UK. And remember, we're going to think of the Cambridge ACE exam and the GCSE, all of these major A-level exams. These are all designed to weed out, to separate the chaffs, right, from the wheat. Okay. So within the environment, children with authoritative parents tended to excel beyond those whose parents were more permissive and more laid back about their children's work ethics. As expected, Chinese parents were the strictest of all my clients, and their expectations of their children tended to be much higher than Black and South Asians' parents. Pakistani parents seemed to be less structured and was more relaxed when enforcing discipline when compared to Chinese and Indians. In addition, some Black parents exhibited sporadic involvement and tended to show more interest closer to the date of the exam, which is not surprising because Black people are functioning from a reactionary culture, a reactionary. We only make moves when we believe when there is when something negative has happened, then we react to it. Okay, so it's the same thing with exams, where children are responding negatively, where parents are responding negatively to children to the when the exams are coming up, and this can be you know an issue. So Chinese pupils had better attendance than other groups, even though many took part in extracurricular activities such as music, martial arts, Cantonese Sunday schools or Saturday schools, etc. They had the best attendance, and they also required or requested additional tuition sessions. Okay, so we have to look at these styles of parenting, and it is the parenting that actually decides the results that the child gets. The child can't get the result on their own. And of course, the school participates in that. Okay, if you got a good school, you may see that teachers go above and beyond because they're being paid well, or they have excellent equipment that they can, utilize, resources, I should say, not just equipment, but resources, and so on, to boost attainment. Okay, so that's today's podcast. I want you to think about parenting, okay, and how that impacts on your child learning. And if you're engaged with your child, if you're not engaging with your child on a daily basis, then you're going to find that they're not going to do that well, even if they're gifted. So you could see that Black parents, for example, who achieve the best out of their children are those who homeschool, right? And when you think about homeschooling, you realize that the parents spend quality time with their children. They're always supporting them in that homeschooling environment. It's like there's a very close relationship. But there is also an exception. I'm going to read this paragraph and then we're going to wrap up. Okay. And I want you to share this video with your friends and families. There were exceptions to the rule in all ethnic groups. Somalian parents were more willing to pay additional fees for tuition and would request extra days for their children to attend after-school tuition. Also, Somalian parents were more likely to refer our services to friends and family members and would also request home visits. Black Caribbean parents who were recent immigrants to the UK and continental Africans were hardest on their children and demanded more from them. Often, the driving force behind this was a desire to create a better life for their children by providing opportunities they themselves did not have as children. Thank you for joining my podcast today. I hope the discussion that we had, okay, and the I'm using Zoom to do this podcast, so the book is not showing up perfectly, but you can, as I said, you can get it on Barnes and Noble. It's not just about grades, about culture. You can get it on Amazon, and you can get it from my website, culturetransforms.com. Okay, read it. Stop saying you don't read. Pick up the book and read it and give me some feedback or write me a review on Amazon. Okay, you can't expect your children to do well and you yourself don't read, you don't care about books. That is the mentality, okay, of the poor. That is the mentality of the subservient class. The elites read. Okay, those people are in charge. University professors, the people who run society, have to read. Okay, so I thank you very much, and thanks for joining. Have a wonderful day.